Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Policy and Practice's October webinar, which is how to predict demand for your customer-facing services in April 21. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to have you on board for today's webinar. And just while we wait for a few more people to join us, a great number already, but just to do a little bit of housekeeping. In the panel on the right-hand side, if you could raise your digital hand for me to do an audio check with you, that would be fantastic. In that same panel, you'll be able to ask questions throughout for our speakers, so please do pop them in as and when they occur to you, and there'll be time at the end for us to get to all of those questions. The more the better. There is a download in that same panel. It's our new product brochure, so please do take a moment to download and have a look at that. We've got some polls during the webinar and a survey at the end, so nice and interactive for you today. We do aim to be finished by 11:30, and for today we have an optional 15 minutes for those of you who can stay behind for a demo, just to go through some of the software in more detail if you're interested in that. The slides and the recording will be sent to you automatically, so no need to take notes. And indeed, for those Twitterers amongst you, please do follow us on Twitter at _policy_practice. Brilliant. Okay, so now let me introduce you to today's speakers. Very delighted to introduce such an eminent panel, and if I can just get the if everybody could show their videos, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Excellent, great. So today's speakers, we have my colleague Zoe Charlesworth, Director of Policy and Operations at Policy and Practice. Zoe, do you want to say hello?
Morning, everybody.
Thank you. And my colleague Louise Murphy, Senior Policy and Data Analyst at Policy and Practice. Louise?
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
And our guest speaker today, Clive Jones, Head of Revenues and Benefits at Luton Council. Clive?
Good morning, everybody.
And my colleague, last but not least, Fabiana McCaw, Policy and Data Analyst at Policy and Practice. Fabiana?
Hi, everyone. Nice to have you here.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, everybody. Great to have such a really good panel of speakers today. Okay, and more of everybody in a moment. So just a little bit about Policy and Practice. For those new ones on the webinar, if you've not heard of us before, we're an organisation that exists to give the best support, to help you to give the best support you can to help people on the way. And as you see there, we do that in 3 different ways with our policy, analysis and software. So yeah, what we do, so we're a team of professionals with extensive knowledge of the welfare system, and we are passionate about making social policy work. We help over 100 local authorities use household level data to identify vulnerable households, target support to them and track those interventions over time, and more about that on today's webinar. We'll be focusing on that, but also our award-winning benefit and budgeting calculator. It's listed on gov.uk and engages over 10,000 people every day. With that calculator, we help people to identify the steps they can take to increase their income, lower their costs and build their financial resilience. So yeah, it's a little bit just about what we do. So today's agenda, a packed agenda today. We're really excited about what we've got to talk about today. So in a changing world, why should you plan ahead? There is so much uncertainty, so why plan ahead when there is so much uncertainty, so much that we don't know? But then we're also going to look at how you can understand the future better using modelling. And then also Clive is going to give us Luton's experience about changes to the caseload and how they're creating some certainty from what is a very uncertain time. And we're going to end on a positive look ahead and what can be done in such an uncertain times. And as I mentioned, there'll be time for Q&As, and Fabiana is going to do the optional 15-minute demo of the software at the end, which I do hope you can all stay for. Brilliant. Okay, so without further ado, and before I hand over to Zoe, I would just like to ask our first poll, if I may. And this, to kick us off, what we're looking at here, I'd really like to know which of all of the uncertainty, which uncertainty most concerns you? So hopefully you can see that poll on your screen. Is it a rise in council tax reduction caseload and the associated budget needed for that? Is it a rise in homelessness? Is it rising demand for discretionary welfare support? Is it not enough finance from central government? And is it Brexit? or is it Brexit? Now, appreciate, as is the case with all of our polls, it may well be a combination of all of those. So it's a tough question, but if you could choose which one is the most important one, the one that's giving you the most worry at the moment, we'd really like for you to pick that one out. Great to see the answers coming in. Thank you very much for voting. I'll just leave it for a little bit longer so more people can get their vote in, and then I shall be asking Zoe to comment on the findings. Brilliant, very interesting. I'm going to close the poll there. Thank you, and share the results on your screen, which hopefully you can see now. Zoe, can you see those answers on your screen, and what do you make of them, assuming you can?
I can, thanks, Janet. I think these are very interesting. I didn't expect the one around finance from central government to be so great, but of course there's so much uncertainty about that. I mean, Clive will be touching on this, so I'll leave that to him. But for local authorities, they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment. To make any sort of planning for the future, you need to have know that the resources are going to be there for you to be able to carry out those plans. And I think that sort of interacts, doesn't it, with the rise in homelessness, a rise in the need for the support, because for all of that you need the budget, and if there isn't any financial support coming from central government, or if it's unknown, if it's changing all the time and unknown, it's very difficult for people to plan. So yeah, Brexit very low. I think we're just so focused, aren't we, on coronavirus at the moment, that I think Brexit is going to hit us sort of when we're halfway through that one. But it's something that we're also trying to put out of our minds at the moment. But we'll be coming on to it when we look at our future forecasting.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks, Zoe. Let me close that poll now, and then hand over to you, Zoe, in 2 seconds. Great. Okay. Over to you, Zoe. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. I'm just going to do a quick introduction about where we are now. At Policy and Practice, we've always been involved in future forecasting. We work with a lot of organisations, and a lot of the work we do is about modelling change. The impacts of expected change, or some sort of modelling of where we think inflation and things are going. But we're in a position where we've had to adjust all our forecasts, and you'll all be in the same position. We've moved from a position of relative stability where the changes are known to a situation now where there's a real range of possible scenarios for the future, and a real range of different forecasts we could use. Louise will be going into that shortly about how we select between them and how we choose how to forecast. But the reason this has happened is obviously the economic impacts of coronavirus, and we've got people on out of work benefits have doubled by July 2020, and that's expected to rise because 15% of the just under 10 million people on furlough are estimated will be unemployed. And the last week's labour market stats shows redundancies have doubled in the last quarter. So we're in an ever-changing situation, and on top of that, we know that some things are still changing, are about to change. Furlough's ending, but we've just had the announcement of 2 new schemes. We've got the part-time job support scheme, where employers, people who are working at least a third of their hours, another third is met by the government and their employer. We don't know the impact that's going to have. Will employers choose not to have part-time staff and just stick with their full-time staff? Who knows? So that's an unknown. There's a lockdown job support scheme where 2/3 of people's wages will be met if they can't go to work because of local lockdown. And we're not really sure of the impacts of these yet. It's a matter of waiting and seeing, but we can at least model various scenarios around them. The COVID-19 benefit changes that were introduced, I think, were intended to be short-term. They're due to expire. Will they expire? We'll be coming on to that. And of course, we have Brexit. I actually think Brexit is going to have quite a lot of economic impact, affect certain jobs, maybe more localized, maybe different types of jobs. But it's certainly something that if you're looking into the future forecasting, we need to take account of. All this leads to a lot of uncertainty for councils when they're making decisions about frontline services and the budgets onwards. And from 2021, we're at the moment, this period of continual flux, we can't see it ending. I mean, it's very difficult to see where it's going to end. Thanks, Janet. So from a local authority point of view, council tax collection has suffered from all this change. There's 1.3 million households in arrears. Obviously, this has a huge impact on the mental health and well-being of those households. This is worth £500 million, which has an impact on council's ability to resource support. So there's two impacts of this. This reduction in income, the reduction in income for the household is the main reason, of course, that people are in arrears. But also being a key worker and having to shield are also factors. In addition to that, from a local authority point of view, homelessness landscape has changed. Initially, there was a great effort to get all the street homeless placed in emergency accommodation, and many of these were moved into temporary accommodation as part of the Everyone In initiative. But the funding for that initiative has now stopped. The government announced this week of £13 million for winter support to support people off the streets through winter. 13 million sounds a lot, but amongst all the local authorities, the amount of homeless and the number of street homeless, it's not really an awful lot of support. The moratorium on evictions has ended, but now we've got a new 6-month notice period. So we won't be seeing the effects of that unless notice was handed in to the tenant before August. We won't be seeing the effects of that till further down the line. There's also been the introduction of some lockdown measures so that any area in a local lockdown has some protective measures against evictions. So when we're sort of looking at the impacts and we're forecasting impacts on homelessness, all these things have to be taken into account. The final point I've got there is the impact of the benefit cap, because we saw the one of the measures that was introduced in response to the economic downturn and keep people safe in their homes was the introduction of the increase in the LHA to the 30th percentile, i.e. back to where it was before austerity measures. For a lot of areas, the interaction of the LHA increase with the benefit cap meant they saw no change. So if we're forecasting for homelessness and the impact that has on frontline services, this is very, very localised. If in London, the only people who are likely to have seen that LHA increase were couples without children. And it's not just London, there are other areas of the country, very pockets, whereby that the LHA increase wasn't felt by the tenants, which of course that has to be taken into account in any forecasting around homelessness. Thanks, Janet. For some reason, my slide isn't moving on here, so I'll try and find it myself. Just a second. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is why local authorities should plan ahead. Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm getting myself in a bit of a muddle here. Yeah, future changes.
So we're on the future changes slide. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think I had a bit of a lag in my internet there. Sorry, everybody. So yes, I was just looking at the old slide still. This is one of the hazards of lockdown, isn't it? It's another unknown. So yes, so in all our forecasting, we have to look at what we know is definitely going to happen. But also there's I think, was it Bush, the known unknowns? So what we do know, we know that the minimum income floor is due to be reinstated. We know that the welfare changes, the uplift of the £20 a week to universal credit and working tax credits, the LHA increased to 30%. These are also due to end in April. At the moment, we can take those into account. We can presume they're ending because that is what the legislation stands. That's where the regulations are now. But there are things that may vary. The unemployment impact of furlough, even though some of the predictions by very good organisations like the OBR may be close, it will be very localised. So that's something we need a variance because we can't be absolutely certain of the impact. So similarly, impact of local lockdowns. Local lockdowns, we don't know where they're going to occur. So to predict the impact on the local economy because of local lockdowns is quite tricky. We also don't know if there's going to be a last minute U-turn on the welfare uplift. There's a lot of pressure. On Twitter, I'm just seeing every day more and more organisations saying that this has to be kept. After April, to have a sudden drop in universal credit support as numbers relying on universal credit go up is just not feasible. But we're going to have to see where that goes. Thanks, Janet. And finally, they just want to say why, because of all this, why is it useful to plan ahead? Forecasting and understanding these various impacts and the interaction of these impacts can allow organisation, or particularly local authorities, have an idea of benefit caseloads and the resources needed to maintain those caseloads. Similarly, it can give you an idea of the resources required to support different demographics. We can, forecasting can include demographic breakdown. It's very localised. Your demographics are very localised. So for every local authority and for every area, there'll be a different groups that may need support as you go into the future. This obviously, there is a lot of implications for service delivery, budgets and financial planning, but I think we mustn't forget for the households out there, there's huge issues around debt and arrears and how the debtors face recovery of those debts and how they approach recovery of the debts. There will be a risk of homelessness for some families, particularly those who don't benefit from the increased LHA. And I think one of the most important sort of forecastings we do is around financial resilience and poverty. And Louise will come onto that and how we can track that. I think that's all I've got to say. I think it's more important that we look into how we do the forecasting. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, and I'm going to serve our second poll now. And hopefully you can see this one on your screen right now before we move over to Louise. So this poll is, there we go, should be there now. What's the biggest change that you're making to your frontline services in view of COVID-19? Okay, and again, like all of the polls, as I said earlier, it may be that it's a combination of these factors, but please just choose the number one for you. So is it that you are increasing welfare support to your residents? Is it that you're targeting support to those in arrears? Are you giving extra help with employment support and retraining as the biggest change? Are you realigning, a big change, are you realigning internal services from your organisation around the customer, so as a reorg on the cards, or are you not planning any changes just at the moment? Brilliant, I can see lots of people voting, and again I'll just give it a little bit more time to answer this question. And indeed, if you find that the biggest change that you're making to your frontline services in view of COVID-19 isn't listed here, we would be very interested to know what that is, so do drop that into the chat. Into the question functionality, and we will pick that up, or the chat functionality, and we will pick that up because we're very interested to hear everybody's experiences so far. Great, okay, so let me share that, close the poll and share that results on screen for you to have a look at. Coming up now. Zoe and Louise, comments on the poll answers, if you have any. Zoe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely, Janet. So yeah, I think this is sort of reflects exactly what we were saying before, that there are two really major impacts, aren't there? There's the impact on the organisations in terms of resources, like targeting support to those in arrears, realigning internal services, but there's also the impact on the residents. Increasing welfare support to residents, I think, is absolutely vital. I mean, it's something we'll be touching on later, but ensuring people can maximise income. There's very little, you know, we're not the government, we can't choose how much support people get. What we can do is make sure people access absolutely everything they can, and for that, personalised support is necessary. Targeting support to those in arrears is a really good idea, especially if local authorities got information on council tax arrears. I mean, council tax arrears is often called the gateway arrears, isn't it? That it's the first arrears that often shows up. So you're getting an immediate idea of somebody in crisis. And Louise, and we'll be talking about that later, about how we can track that.
Excellent. Louise, thanks, Zoe. Louise, any comments before I move over to you?
Yeah, really just sort of echoing what Zoe says. I think this captures that, you know, there's a lot for people to think about, isn't it? You know, at the same time, you know, you're trying to increase support for residents, but also thinking about the organisational side of things. And as Zoe said, I'll touch on some of these things a bit more about how, you know, you can use data on council tax arrears to target your support.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks, Louise. Looking forward to that. So let me finish that, and without further ado, hand over to you, Louise, for your section. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Janet. So basically sort of following on from Zoe, oh, I think we're just sharing my camera. That should come up now. Yeah, I'll hopefully just touch a bit more on kind of how we're doing this modelling into the future and some of the areas that we're focusing on. So I guess just to give a little bit of a background, kind of why we're focusing so much on future modelling now, really because kind of, to put it lightly, 2020 has not been what we expected. We were previously doing some future modelling into 2023. That was what a lot of councils and organisations that we worked with kind of last year were interested in. So, for example, a lot of the questions they were kind of using data to answer was, you know, let's say there's a household who's just about coping now, but we know that they're maybe on legacy benefits and that they're due to move over onto universal credit. What will their kind of financial situation look like in the future when they move to universal credit, so that they can identify households who, you know, they really need to make sure are supported kind of when that change happens. And they were happy for us to, you know, make some assumptions around, you know, inflation rates, unemployment rates, you know, whether rent and council tax will increase. Obviously, there were a few caveats we couldn't know for certain, but these sort of big, like kind of rates set by the Bank of England and the OBR, they were taken as, you know, pretty legitimate that we could use those. But now that's sort of basically just less of the case. 2023 seems like quite a long time away, and predicting what unemployment rates or you know, inflation rates will be like then just seems you know, like quite a stretch. So I think our priorities changed a little bit. Instead of sort of predicting one set situation, our kind of clients wanted to have the flexibility to, for example, compare what the situation would look like if the COVID-19 measures were retained compared to whether they were stopped. And that's really the approach we've taken in our modelling. What we're doing now is showing basically a best case situation where the £20 a week uplift remains, where the minimum income floor is still suspended for self-employed people. And then we can compare that to like a worst case situation where these measures are dropped. And we hope that that then gives councils the flexibility to kind of, you know, prepare for, I guess, both situations, or depending on their internal kind of situation in that council or the kind of information that they have, they can choose which one of those situations they want to prepare for. We've also introduced a little bit more flexibility with some of these assumptions around things like unemployment rates. So we're taking into account local data. So we've got local authority level data on the number of households that are furloughed, and we're using that to inform, you know, what the likely rise in unemployment will be. So yeah, we're kind of just trying to make it that bit more accurate, given that you know, the world's a lot more uncertain now than it was last year. Thanks, Janet. I think I can move on. So yeah, basically what we've got here is a preview of a new screen in our LIFT platform, where we are kind of hoping to show this future modelling. I'll try and walk you through the screen because I know it's I guess it might be a little bit small on some of your screens, and it's, you know, there's a lot of information to take in. But the format that we've gone for is sort of splitting the screen into these 3 columns. So over on the left there, we have the past situation. So that's looking at your residents in February, so just before the pandemic, to understand basically what the baseline was, you know, what the situation was in your local authority before COVID-19. And then in the middle here, we've got the current situation. So this draft analysis was using August data for Luton. And basically what that does, you know, we were speaking to various users of the LIFT platform, and they wanted to know, you know, what has been the impact of COVID, you know, what are the differences that we're seeing between February and now, and, you know, are there any interesting kind of learnings that we can take from that? And then what we've got over on the right here is the future scenario. So as I talked about, we have sort of modelled increases to unemployment, things like that, so that we can then see, you know, what we expect Luton's situation to be in 2021. I'll speak a little bit more about the sort of numbers that we're showing. So up in this top row here, we're looking at the overall caseload. And I guess some of you might be surprised to see that this number actually decreases from just about 17,000 down to 16,500. And I think I'll go on to speak about that in a little bit more detail, but that took us a little bit by surprise. And I think it shows why this analysis is needed, that you need to really look at your localized administrative data to understand what's going on in your area. That actually, because of the move from housing benefit over to universal credit, although lots of people are becoming unemployed and needing benefit support, councils' caseloads are often actually decreasing as people move from housing benefit over onto universal credit. And I think we need to be making sure that people are kind of claiming council tax support when when they're eligible for it. What we've got down here in this sort of middle section is a focus on council tax support. I'll speak a little bit about that, and also that's something that Clive can speak about. But again, something that we've heard from councils is that they're really struggling to model or predict what their council tax support costs will be next year. You know, they're expecting that more people will be needing support, and having to plan budgets and things like that is really tricky. So again, we've kind of compared what the cost of this scheme is now compared to in February. You can see that it's a little bit more expensive, because although there's been a slight decrease in the number of households claiming support, actually the cost per household has gone up. And again, if you had this data, if you were in Luton and you had access to the dashboard, you can then drill down and really understand why that is. And then down the bottom, I guess just to try and make sense of this really complicated picture, we've tried to break it down into percentages so you can look at demographics. So for example, in this screenshot here, we've just broken down the percentage of people who are unemployed. And you can see that, as you would expect, that's gone up, that regardless of actually how many, in an actual kind of number, how many households are claiming support, the percentage of people who are unemployed has gone up, and that obviously is what you would expect. But thinking a bit about, I guess, frontline services, that has an impact. If you're seeing more unemployed people, that has an impact on the type of support that you might be giving people. Yeah, so I think if we move on to the next slide, I've got a bit of a breakdown about this point I mentioned about caseload changes, and I thought it was worth just talking about this a little bit more, because, as I said, this was something that I guess was even more complicated than we expected it to be. And really that's just because although COVID-19 has hit and there are more people that are out of work, that's only one of many things that's going on. There's also the move to universal credit. Many councils changed their council tax reduction scheme in April, and combined this can lead to quite a complicated picture. So basically what I've got here is month by month throughout 2020, the caseload statistics for Luton. So on the left here, we've got the total housing benefit and council tax support caseload, and what these are percentages compared to the month before. So for example, here we see in February, there was a slight, a 0.6% decrease in caseload between January and February. And then we see in the middle column, just the housing benefit caseload. We can see this is fully red, so that's dropping month on month. And that's what we would expect, that more and more people are moving over from housing benefit to universal credit. And you can see these numbers are higher kind of at the peak of the pandemic in March, April, May. And that would be, if there was someone that was on housing benefit who was in work, for example, and they lost their job, that would often trigger a move on to universal credit. So they would leave the housing benefit caseload. But I guess quite interestingly, we look at this council tax support caseload column over on the right here. And actually, I think we initially thought that there might be more green here, that there'd be bigger increases to council tax support, since there'd be more people that are let's say losing their job, and and kind of claiming council tax support for the first time. But actually, it's way more complicated than that. First of all, the picture of this sort of table really does vary between councils. So I'd urge any of you at different councils to kind of think about what this looks like in your area. I think it will be really interesting to think about what the picture is where you are. And yeah, what we can see here is actually there was quite a big drop off in April and May, which makes sense when we look at kind of what's been going on in Luton, that they changed their council tax support scheme at the start of the financial year. It became slightly less generous to certain households, so some people were losing eligibility. And also when we think about the mechanics of, how does a council tax support claim work? It's separate to the universal credit claim. So it's quite possible that there'll be people that were either moving from housing benefit to universal credit or making new claims altogether, and they didn't immediately make that claim for council tax support at the same time. And I guess it's possible that then, a few months later, where they realised that, they were, struggling to pay their council tax, that was when they started to make claims, and we can see there's been a slight increase to the council tax support caseload. So I think, I guess just to kind of summarise this one, it's complicated. I think, all councils have this data. I think it's important that you use it to understand what the picture is where you are. And also on this point about council tax support, if you are an advice agency, a citizen's advice, think about, do you know what the claim process is like in your local authority? We know that some councils treat a move to universal credit as an automatic kind of trigger to start a claim for CTS, which would likely mean that these CTR caseload stats might be a bit higher. That's obviously not always possible in every area. It's not, the process that's followed throughout the UK. And if it's not, then we would urge people, if you're helping people make applications for universal credit, do also, make sure that people are claiming CTR when they're eligible. So, I guess just a quick focus here to follow up on what I mentioned when I was looking at that overall screenshot is just a bit of a focus on demographics. That's sort of linking back to, I guess, the focus of this webinar, which is all about, the impact on frontline services. I focused a bit on council tax support, but I know that not all of you will be as interested in that. But I guess the point is, by analysing the data, you can also just see, who are the people that we're supporting now. We can see here, this again is looking at Luton's data, that there's a higher proportion of people that are unemployed now compared to pre-COVID. And then when we're modelling into 2021, we can see that in the best case scenario, so that's assuming that things like the £20 uplift are retained, that the LHA rates are still up at their higher level, that the unemployment rate is about 44%, but in that worst case scenario, it's up to just about 52%. This will obviously, again, vary council to council, depending which, for example, unemployment kind of predictions you want to use. So I guess take this as an example, a work in progress, but you can basically see that things are likely to get, more challenging. And depending on which area you work in, you can do these sorts of breakdowns. So if you're thinking about homelessness, you can think about demographic breakdowns. Are we expecting there to be many more, single person households needing support, or are we expecting there to be lots more people with children that are needing support? And that will obviously have an impact on your way of working. Yep, and I guess, sorry, just the final point I think is just, if you're not a local authority, do see if your local authority can share this information with you. They've got it month by month, and hopefully that can kind of help you prepare for the future. And finally, I guess just as a link into Clive's section, I thought we would focus a little bit on cost. Obviously, we're thinking about how we can support people, thinking about what impact this will have on individual households. But we know that a lot of councils are really struggling at the moment with, they're having to support more people, but also, they're not, the business rates are, arrears and non-payments are going up. So this is, one of many problems that that councils are facing. So what we're trying to do is use the data that we've got to model, as best as possible, the cost of services, for example, like council tax support in 2021. We can do that using, the actual data that we've got of the current cost of the council tax support, and then we can project that into the future by looking at, the demographics of the people that will be joining your cohort, what their average CTR awards will be, and projecting, as I said, whether there'll be more people are out of work or in work in the future. What we can also do, and I think this is interesting, and based on the poll that we saw a few minutes ago, that there is that focus on arrears, that it's important to use data to kind of think about the broader picture. So, if, let's say, as a response to this, we're thinking about changing our council tax support scheme to save a bit of money, I think it's worthwhile before you do that to merge your council tax arrears data with your benefits data to think, actually, if we, for example, move to an income banded scheme, which is less generous to certain types of households, will the households who are already in arrears become worse off? And if so, I guess it's worth thinking, actually, although the council tax support scheme is becoming less generous and we might save money in one aspect, actually, is that going to have a big knock-on impact on council tax arrears and non-payment? And although a lot of that can sound very speculative, it actually is possible with the data to do some, fairly accurate modelling so that you can know as best as possible what the likely impacts will be. So yeah, I think that was sort of everything for me. I think that links over onto Clive's section where he can talk a bit about the challenges that Luton are facing and their plans for the future.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Louise. And please do get your questions in for Louise in the chat or the question panel on the right-hand side. I'm sure there'll be lots of very interesting questions coming your way shortly. But before that, over now to Zoe and Clive, who are going to talk about the situation in Luton. Okay. Zoe, I think you're self-muted at the minute if you want to get your mic up.
I was. Thank you, Janet. Hi, Clive. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Zoe. Thank you.
I'm going to sort of approach this by asking you a few questions that lead on from Louise's section, really, but also we're very interested to hear from you about the practical implications for local authorities, and obviously you're on the front line and you're doing this planning, all this planning, we're talking about all this use of data. So I think probably the best place to start is if you could let us know in Luton what changes you've seen to those accessing frontline services. What does your caseload change be? And of course that's not just CTR, that's the people you're dealing with who've got arrears and also people who are needing welfare support. Yeah, if you want to comment on those residents that you're now seeing that you didn't see before.
Yes, okay. It's a very strange situation, of course. We've all gone home working, and so the face-to-face channel is effectively in Luton been closed since March the 23rd, and we've been doing a lot of things online and a lot of things through the telephony. You're quite right, the switch from housing benefits to universal credit continues, and I think if anything COVID increased that change. So our housing benefit only claims since February using our caseload data down by 9.52%. Interestingly enough, our CTR only caseload, which is where you would think they would all move to if they'd gone on to universal credit, has only increased by 2.81%. So not everybody that's coming off housing benefit is going on to universal credit and claiming CTR. And it'd be interesting to note what the difference was. Our CTR only claims, though, if you look at that, has actually increased by 11.8% since February. So there is a big, even though our overall caseload has only dropped by 0.5% since February because of the housing benefit drop, it's been effectively replaced by the CTR growth. on arrears, it's quite interesting, and this is where I use the Lift dashboard, and I'm actually using it now whilst talking to you. So we've got data going back to 2018, and since 2018, if you look at the total number, I'm using the outcome tracker of the Lift dashboard. Since 2018, if you look at the number of households that have been either on CTR or housing benefit, it totals 24,698. And if we look at those, of which those households that are in the cohort from February to now, of those 24,698, 10,381 of them were in it back in 2018 and are still on benefits of some sort, whether it be CTR or housing benefit. Now that's 10,381. But just looking at the impact between February and September, our average arrears data actually has gone down by over £250, has gone down by 1%. So even though our council tax collection rates are down by 2.5% in that period to where we would normally be, our actual large arrears has actually gone down. The interesting statistic for me is the cash shortfall, where people don't have enough money to pay their rent. And that's gone down as a percentage of that cohort from 20% to 17%. That's dropped by 3%. Now, the only thing I can think of that is driving that is the switch to universal credit, and the additional £20 a week on universal credit is meaning that actually, as we know, universal credit has a bad press, and not everybody that goes onto it is worse off. And in fact, our data says 64% of people that were on our original housing benefit would be better off on the universal credit. So whilst they are having an unemployment event, that's proved out because the Lift dashboard is telling me unemployment has risen by 7% from 67% to 74%. Obviously, they're getting slightly better benefits on universal credit. So it's not all gloom and doom, but it is showing a massive rise in unemployment. 7,141 were in unemployment in February, and now we have 329 of the households moved into unemployment of working age by September 2020. So that's probably explaining the drop in housing benefit. Those people became unemployed. And 56 households actually moved out of unemployment in that period between February and September. So a lot more going into unemployment than staying in. So yeah, I think this just highlights, Zoe, that I have an immense amount of data that the Lift dashboard gives me, of which I can present to my councillors who are making decisions. We changed the scheme last year. They've decided to change the scheme this year. We're currently out to consultation. So in combination of the consultation feedback, I can give the feedback and the context of our residents to the councillors so they can make an informed decision, because at the moment it hasn't shown through yet in council tax arrears, but I'm pretty certain it will. There's just a time lag.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Clive, because that does reflect the research we did on the impact of those uplifts that were given to people. We saw 6% of people who were in crisis, not in crisis, but I think your use of that data and the assumptions you can make because of those figures does show that actually it is really complicated. There is lots of interaction. We all know unemployment's going up, but actually, for some people who've had to move onto universal credit, that uplift has actually made quite a lot of difference. And I think particularly around the self-employed is the removal of the minimum income floor has made a huge difference to them. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. You've talked a lot about how you've used your data to sort of understand what's happened up to this point. Is it coming into how you're planning for the future, apart from your CTR scheme changes? I mean, in terms of your customer-facing services?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a prevention team that sits in our customer services section, and they're using this data to target households proactively that are worse off under the scheme changes that we currently put in place in April. And they're proactively making contact predominantly through the telephone. But as part of the scheme changes, £800,000 of that saving has gone back into mitigation, and that's employment training or skills training. And as you can see, with a 7% increase in unemployment, it's even more important that we put our mitigation and our support for training and skills into place as quickly as possible. It's been a little bit more difficult than we anticipated because most of our training is now online, whereas we were anticipating people to come in for some training. But good regards to our business support unit that do the training, skills training. They've switched predominantly to online training now, so it's still continuing. And that is absolutely critical to making sure that we reduce the pressure on budgets going forward. I am desperate. You've shown me that preview. I've got a councillor meeting early in November. The consultation ends on the 2nd of November, and I'm desperate to have that preview data. So yes, I already had a look at the screen earlier on, but I know it's in development.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to exactly what you were saying earlier, Clive, that actually, although we can look at the situation now and we've got figures in front of us saying this is a caseload now, this is the impacts on our collection rate, our arrears now. Actually, once you start forecasting, even the best case scenarios, probably there is going to be an increase. And using that data to plan, I think, is utterly crucial. Do you actually use the data to target any support? So for around, I'm talking about discretionary benefits like around DHPs, and you've got your prevention team. And I know that they're engaging with people who've been affected by your CTR changes. But what about other welfare assistants and DHPs? Do you target those, or do you leave that to be reactive when people come in?
It's more of an ambition because of the resources that we have available to actually assist people. And we're predominantly looking at the people that have been impacted by the CTR change. But we do have the information on those that are possibly should be claiming a discretionary housing payment and are not. So in that contact with the people that we're targeting specifically, if we can see whether they are entitled to or not just from the dashboard for potentially a discretionary housing payment, and encourage them to apply. And if we have time and we use the dashboard to make contact to those people that potentially, there are lots of benefits, some of the free school meals, for instance, applications, we can see those from the dashboard as well, and we can actually contact those residents if we have resource to do so.
Yeah, internally, Clive, what is your department's, what have you done so far up to this point in response to the changes to now? Have you put more people on the front line? That's just an example, but or put more people to work with those with arrears, or is that something you're planning for the future?
In our recovery section, of course, we didn't do any recovery for the first 3 months. That was stopped altogether. We're now putting all of that resource to try and friendly nudge those people that are struggling. And if we identify through our telephone contact through recovery, anybody that is potentially struggling, we can check through the Lift dashboard, see if they are one of those with a cash shortfall, and put them through to the prevention team for further advice and guidance, and possibly skills training and support. So we've got 4 additional people. That team is a brand new team since April, and we have a process of the council tax recovery people referring people on to those specialist advisors for advice and guidance. And it's maximising some of the existing support that was there before as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see such low take-up of certain things that can really boost people's income. And we, none of us are in a position where we can really make huge changes to government policy on these things, but we can make sure that at least households get what, every bit of it, income they can at the moment. And, that will actually help them with arrears. And we know that arrears causes all sorts of well-being issues, as well as huge problems for the council and the level of support they're able to offer if the council isn't getting in the money it needed. So that maximisation, I think, is absolutely hugely important. It's
essential.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if final question, Clive, before we get on to questions, I'm sure there'll be loads of questions to you. We had a long conversation yesterday for the listeners when we were discussing this. There's so much information from Luton to actually hear about how a council's coping on the front line, and actually there's so much we haven't brought into this conversation because we're focusing on future forecasting. But when you start looking at the resource, the income changes that Luton has had to face, and of course the new services that Luton's had to provide. I mean, you're now, I presume, sorry, before we get to the last question, how are you coping with the £500 lockdown payment? Have you sorted that out? Are you up and running?
Yes, that is live. Went live on Monday, and yeah, so far, touch wood, we're okay. It's just another example of I call it fly by wire, but that's probably doing a disservice to how aeroplanes fly. It just, I think by wire, I think it feels as if you're walking a very dangerous tightrope, and you could quite easily fall off, particularly when they announce changes in the regulation and they send it through at sort of 5:40 or 6 o'clock at night, just before you're about to launch. Based on the previous.
You had a couple of weeks to implement it. I think local authorities have done a fantastic job. Some of the councils we're working with, the amount of new resources they've managed to find in very, very tightened circumstances to help those who need support. But then being charged by central government with continually new services you have to offer is a real juggle. I mean, I just cannot. I really hats off to everyone who's working at those frontline organisations now, because it's quite extraordinary what you've achieved. Is there any advice you'd give to other councils about planning for the future before we move on to questions?
Yes, I think look at the data that you have. You have an absolute gold mine of data, and as Louise presented to me today through this webinar, there is some surprising causes and effects of things. It's not, everybody I talked to talks about council tax collection going down, and it is, but arrears haven't yet gone down, and that to me is the big surprise. And it's all about the time, the cause and the effect, and the time lag. And I think the arrears will certainly go up by the end of the year, and it's that uncertainty at the moment that we have. So looking at the worst case, if the £20 and all the LHA is removed in April, and the best case can really give you some. I was at the Revenues and Bends managers for Hearts and Beds yesterday. We were saying that we feel like gypsies with looking into the future, looking into a cloudy crystal ball, trying to predict, a fortune teller, I should say, and it's very difficult. So use the data you've got to give an estimate, and it really is only an estimate. But local data, we've got an airport which is not providing much employment at the moment for people. So for Luton, it's particularly hard because all of the hospitality sector that's associated, all the hotels and restaurants that's associated along with the airport employment, makes our case unique, and every council will have unique data. So it is that local spin on national impact.
Thank you, Clive. And actually, I think you're absolutely right. All the analysis we've done has shown that the local effects are absolutely unique. And in fact, any forecasting does need to use local data, look at the local economic situation, and do local forecasting. So I would completely agree with your point there. I suppose at this point, I'm running out of time here, so I better hand over to Janet in case there's any questions. Oh yes, there's not just known unknowns, there's unknown unknowns. It's exactly what Clive was saying. Things are just hitting frontline organisations left, right and centre, especially people who have to deliver services. But particularly for local authorities, they can make a difference. And a lot of this comes exactly what Clive said, in that movement of resources, the 4 extra people helping people who've been affected. You can make a CTR scheme that doesn't affect those who are in arrears. Louise was discussing that. Look at your data. Any design of CTR scheme, see how it supports your current residents. Debt recovery policy, extremely important. Clive was talking about how those with CT arrears are then firstly signposted to support an income maximisation. I think that's absolutely crucial. We should at least make sure everybody's got as much benefits as they possibly can. Discretionary support, there's been more money to local authorities for discretionary support. Well, that's not enough to cover those affected by the benefit cap and things. It's still a drop in the ocean, but it's there. And I think targeting that, as Clive mentioned, really, really important. That's a really positive difference councils can make. And just to underline exactly that, what we've been talking throughout this whole webinar is the only way to forecast is use your local data, because we're experts at forecasting. We're finding it really tricky. We're ending up with quite wide ranges. So like for Luton's data, but use your local data, and then you can target support and you can forecast and plan for the future. Oh, didn't mention Marcus Rashford there, just to show you can make a difference.
Yes, a bit of inspiration. Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much, Zoe. Right, so now let's go over to our Q&As, I think. Yeah, and I think a lot of what has been talked about today has really struck a chord with everybody. So let me see if I can pick out the questions from people. So I have a question here, and I think this is for yourself, Clive. Is the prevention team, I think that you mentioned, within customer service, is that new as a result of COVID, or has it always been in situ? Have you always had that team?
Okay, good question. It's new, but it's not new because of COVID. It's new because we changed our CTR scheme in April, and part of the options were to actually provide, because we were reducing benefits to some households, was to provide income maximisation and skills and training and employment ready training for those people that might be impacted by that change. So coincidentally, it's been very useful to have made that decision back. We made that decision as an executive last December 19. So I think COVID was only a twinkle in Wuhan in December 19. Nobody realised it was going to happen. So it's very fortunate that it's in place, but it was because of our council tax changes that came in April.
Brilliant, lovely, thank you. I have a point, really, I suppose, rather than a question as such. But this particular person, I won't mention the council name just just to respect. This person says that their council has a dedicated link up with council tax, so that those who are struggling or in arrears are referred to their money support team for income maximisation and debt support. Any reflection, any comment on that from this particular council?
Yeah, I think that's how we would like to see all. I think we've just done some work with the GLA looking at council tax collection, and on that, the biggest correlation around collection wasn't people's policy. It wasn't that if you're really hard on people or you have a flexible policy, that didn't correlate with collection. What correlated with collection was poverty levels and the CTR scheme, and they were the only absolute correlations we found. So in fact, that does mean that most people who can pay will pay, and that automatic signposting of people with CT arrears, if you can get them to maximise support and support at that stage, we will be having breathing space coming. There will be other stuff coming in over time, because Cabinet Office is taking real interest in this. But Clive was saying they do exactly the same at Luton. It seems absolutely necessary. There is no point making life worse for those who can't pay. You need to, those who can't pay need support as much as you can give. And I just think it's great that more and more councils are doing this. I think more and more councils are aware of this now, and it's really good to hear. So Clive, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's absolutely no point. And unfortunately, the council tax legislation really does drive people into debt because you summons them and we charge them a £75 summons fee. So they can be good payers all of their lives and then become unemployed and then decide not to pay the council tax. And then straight away we're getting a liability order, charge them an extra £75 on the perhaps one payment of £150 that they've missed to pay. So we do things like texting all of our debtors before we do a summons run, just to say, please engage with us, please make an arrangement. If you can pay, do pay, because it's going to cost you an extra £75 if we do go ahead in the following week and summons you. So yeah, it's absolutely the right approach. We use propensity to pay data as well from our credit referencing agency. So we look at people's overall debt besides council tax debt, and we do actually proactively target the won't payers and try and make arrangements or refer them to our prevent team for the can't payers. That's absolutely critical.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, everybody. I've just got one last question, I suppose, and maybe for the policy experts amongst us. So you might want to take this one. This person said, I've been trying to find out whether the move to universal credit will begin in November. I'm presuming that means migration in November 2020 as planned. But the response I've had from DWP is that there is no news about this. Has anyone else heard anything about it either way? A plea.
As far as I know, the response is there is no news about this. But I think the chances of them doing, I think that they're knowing that this migration is happening. You know, even if they'd introduced managed migration, they would not have had as many people migrate. As you know, as Clive was saying, people are migrating naturally by keeping that differential between level legacy and universal credit. Everybody who is better off and actually will be better. I mean, there's loads of provisos around that. A lot of people need individual support, so because you can't move back. So a lot of people might think they'd be better off if they move to UC now, but actually that £20 has dropped, or a minimum income floor comes back in, they won't be better off. So there's a lot of individual work needed with people. But I think they're using that to sort of move people over. So I'm expecting managed migration to sort of come in quite a long way down the line now. Yeah, we're in the same position as you. We don't know when it's going to come in, but I think that probably more people are moving over to UC than could have ever managed under managed migration.
Brilliant. Okay, and then just one last final question here. What are your thoughts on a more robust referral from welfare benefits to employment support, as our current referral process isn't very effective? So that's referring from welfare benefits to employment support. How do you do that within Luton, Clive?
Well, we have, as I say, our prevent team. So we've developed a process from our council tax recovery officers and enforcement agents to refer to the welfare prevention team in customer services. They are linked to Citizens Advice, they commission. We have commission through our employment skills and learning, adult learning people. We have commissioned a set of resources in adult learning, and they just refer on to those people in adult learning. Once we've gone through the income maximisation support and in existing advice that is available and support to people, and we can refer them through to we have a big employment skills program in Luton, and that's all part of our 2040 No One in Poverty vision for the council, which is a very, very ambitious vision to have nobody living in poverty by 2040. And all of these are the small steps that we are making towards it. But yeah, I mean, we also had not as strong a link with adult learning until the summer of last year, and we've developed that link and those methods of referral to them by working with them. And we created the budget to do that through the savings that we managed to make with our scheme change last year. But it was very important. We took 1.2 million out and we put 800,000 back of that in mitigation in skills training. So a very important thing to do. And our scheme at the moment is under £1 million spent less than even with the growth. So the mitigation appears to be working. And I'm just, because we only started in April, I'm just gathering the first 6 month stats on that now to see how many people we've actually put into employment through that process.
Brilliant. Okay, I can see that there's more questions coming in, but I'm really conscious of time, so apologies to those that questions I haven't yet answered. I'll put them to Zoe and Clive and the team and get them to you offline if you don't mind. Thank you very much to yourself, Clive, and to Zoe for answering the Q&As. That's fantastic. I just want to finish up for this part of the webinar by just talking here about these practical tools that can help. As Zoe said, there is stuff to be positive about, and there are tools that can help. So as we've talked about today, very much talked about our LIFT platform, and also mentioned perhaps in passing our benefit and budgeting calculator as well. And Fabiana is going to just walk through that a little bit in a moment, and it's grateful if you could stay for that. There is also a welfare support page that we are keeping up to date with all of the changes that are coming through thick and fast. So do take a look at that, and also if you want to link to it from your own websites, please do feel free to do so. I mentioned at the beginning there's a new product brochure, so you can download that from the panel on the right hand side. Before we finish today, there will be an email, the email will come out to you with the slides and the recording of this webinar with links as well. There's going to be a short survey to follow, and within that survey you can book your place on our next webinars as well. 11th of November we're talking about how to find the right debt solution for everyone, and in the 9th of December we're looking back on a very busy policy review of the year and looking forward to 2021. So great, thank you very much. So at this point in time, I just want to check in and just see who can stay for the 15-minute demo. Yeah, so if you could put your hand up for that. Thank you very much. Before I do that, I'm going to, while everybody is giving us your thoughts on that, I will be handing over to Fabiana very shortly. Great. Thank you very much. We seem to have quite a good take up, which is fantastic news. Thank you, everybody. Do appreciate that. I will close this poll now. Thank you, everybody. And I will forward over to Fabiana for the next step. Fabiana, if you want to put your camera on, that would be great.
Hello.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fabiana.
See and hear me. Thank you very much, Janet, and thank you everyone for sticking around for the demo. It won't be too long, it'll be about 15 minutes, just taking you through one of our screens on the LIFT platform and how you can use that to target support and also to track the progress of a campaign. So just getting started on that one, what you'll be seeing on your screen now is the coronavirus dedicated screen, and some of you might be aware already, but LIFT stands for a low income family tracker, and how it works in a nutshell is that councils provide administrative data to us. We then reshape and analyse this data and present it back to councils, and they can identify some key groups with that and provide targeted support and also track the progress of campaigns or interventions. We know that helping residents to maximise their income is really important, as Zoe was mentioning, and as multiple bits of research have highlighted. Household finances can have an impact on things, not just directly on financial resilience, but also on households' ability to pay off their debt, and therefore on collection practices, as well as obviously for demand for crisis-oriented services. And one example that we've got up on the screen of something that will help to maximise that income is take up of free school meals. It's also very timely, potentially benefiting from the positive press from Marcus Rashford. And we know that this free school meals is a benefit that is currently underclaimed. In 2012, 14% of eligible pupils were not claiming free school meals, and this is something that can really help to produce savings for the household. It can amount to just under £65 a month per child. And what we've done on this screen, we've separated out the households that are eligible for free school meals and potentially not claiming, separated by couples and lone parents as well. And as you'll see on the next slide, we can filter down to those lone parent households, for example. Thanks, Janet. And on here, the first thing that you'll see is immediately those 6,000 households have reduced to 759. And that's because, and this is a good opportunity to explain the street level screen, which is what we're on now, and that's because we've applied additional filters to that group. I think it's important to recognise that councils and organisations might be under financial pressures, and they might want to focus on particularly vulnerable groups within that original 6,000 group. So what we've done here, I've focused in on some additional filters. On the second box on the upper side of the screen, you can see how we have filters that are sort of organised by themes. So we have the financial resilience and debt, universal credit. We also have welfare reform, which is the one that we're on at the moment, benefits take up, and COVID-19. And what we've done is we've gone over to the welfare reform related filters. We've picked households that are not only potentially eligible to free school meals, but also at risk of being affected by the 2-child limit. And this has reduced our number down. And at the bottom here, number 4, you'll be able to see economic status. So on the bottom side of the screen, we have our more demographic type of filter, so fixed filters. And here you might choose households that are in work. There has been some evidence that these households tend to claim less for free school meals, potentially because they don't know that they are eligible. So that's just an example of how you might drill down into your group, how you might focus a campaign to those that are most vulnerable or are most likely to not be taking up a benefit. On the next slide, I'll be talking a bit more about how you might engage with that group, and also how that fits into our benefit and budgeting calculator. So on the screen, you will have seen on the previous screen, but also on here, how when you drill down to these households, you see them all dotted around on the map. But it's not just it's not just a visual representation of where they are on the map. You can actually interact with these data points or households. And when you click into one of these households, which is what I've done here, you'll be able to see some information about that household and their specific circumstances. So for example, here you can see that they've got 3 children, so that £65 a month really multiplies for this household in terms of the financial impact. And yeah, just a mention of the kind of engagement that you have with different groups. Some will benefit from a more light touch approach, whereas others will have a more holistic one-to-one support. And I think that really fits in to this idea of centering support around your residents. If you are providing that kind of one-to-one support, it's really useful to have to prepare that conversation ahead of when you speak to a resident, so that you know where the conversation is likely to head. So for example, here you can see that this household is in work and would be better off on universal credit. Yeah, I think we can move over to the next slide, and this takes us nicely to how engagement can then be real time, and this steps into the use of the calculator. So you've picked out a particular household, they would benefit from one-to-one support, and now you want to have the conversation with them to check that they are claiming all the benefits that they're eligible for. You can do this on our award-winning benefit and budgeting calculator to perform that benefit check. Beyond that, the calculator also has the budgeting function, so you'll be able to enter real-time updated costs for that household and really see where the outflows are. Perhaps this household is in debt, etc. And on the screen, you'll be able to see this is a screenshot of what happens at the end of a calculation. You'll be given a heads up on a few talking points based on the information that's been put into the calculator. So for example, for this particular household, if you're advising them, it might be a good idea to mention things like free prescriptions, warm home discounts. And also we do show on there that they'd be better off on universal credit. There's a lot to be said for the calculator, but I'll leave that one there. We do have a lot of webinars relating to the calculator. Move on now. And then going back to Lift and how, you know, you've engaged with this household. Now you want to see how that household has progressed over time after that intervention that you've made, after the support that you've given to them. And that's where the household journey screen comes in really handy. As you can see on the top half of the screen, there is a lot going on here, but I've focused on just 2 bits. On the top half, you can see how in the blue line tells you that household's income over time, and the red line, relatively stable, the expenditure. And you can just see how that has changed for that particular household. And if you have made an intervention between point A and B, you can see how that is associated with the change that you would hope to see. Then on the bottom there, just to give you a more complete understanding of that's the story for that particular household. You can see the benefits that they're eligible for. So just again, some talking points if you were to engage with that household again, and also for evaluating the impact of the scheme. On the next screen, I'll be talking about, you know, what happens when you want to track the progress of an intervention that you've made, and you want to zoom out from that individual household perspective. You want to know how for the entire group that how they've fared over time, and that's where our outcome tracker comes in as very useful. You can select a start and end date, paste in the households that you're interested in, your group of interest. Here we have the 759 households that we selected earlier, and we can track their progress across a range of measures. Things like arrears, cash shortfall, unemployment, and homelessness. We can see how this group has progressed in that respect from, I think in this case it is from April to July, but obviously you can open up that time frame depending on your campaign. And we just know that this kind of tracking and evaluation can be really helpful to councils, be that because an intervention has been successful, or rather because perhaps it's not had the impact that you wanted, and you want to evaluate that. Again with this one, I've kept it fairly brief, and there's a lot going on this screen. What it does tell you, what I've highlighted below for those 248 households, and that bottom of the screen there, it just tells you that journey for the entire cohort. So you can see that between April and July, the majority of households actually moved out of arrears, which is quite interesting. Obviously, this is just demo data, but if you had done an intervention, it would be really interesting to have to see that association. I think we're
brilliant, Fabiana. Thank you. That was quite a quick run through, which was what we intended. But hopefully, many thanks, Fabiana. I think hopefully that gives people a little more insight into the broader insight, if you like, into the Lift dashboard. We'll be very happy, appreciate the time pressures today, very happy for any of the team to walk you through either the dashboard, well, indeed both the dashboard and the calculator at your own pace with your own colleagues, and just answering the questions that you have. So do ask us for that in the survey that's going to come up at the end. But it leaves me a great pleasure now to say thank you very much to everybody today for joining us on the webinar, yourselves included, audience, but also in particular I'd like to thank Clive Jones, Head of Finance and Revenues and Benefits, at Luton Borough Council. Clive's left us now, he had to go to another meeting, there's no rest. But also to my colleagues, so Zoe Charlesworth, Louise Murphy and Fabiana McCaw. Thank you very much everybody for your time today. As I said earlier, there is a quick survey at the end. Do fill that in, and you can request more information in that survey and sign up to our next webinars there. But without further ado, it's goodbye from me and from the rest of the team, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Do take care. Hope to see you again soon. Bye everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.